Yeah, so the question of the definition of happiness, what is happiness? So in a way, there's nothing more important for us. If the ancients are right, if Thomas Aquinas is right, then all that we do is for the sake of happiness.
If you look at the history of human thought, happiness has always been a question of having our desires fulfilled in some way.
And if that's true, then there's such an imperative for us to figure out, okay, so what in the world is happiness?
Happiness is the maximal flourishing of a human being. Maximal flourishing in any aspect.
Well, I usually talk about joy as opposed to happiness, but either way, I would say that ultimately to be happy, we find ourselves happy when we're doing what we're made to be doing. That we're ultimately happy when we are trying to fulfill the will of God, even when we fail.
We as Catholics and as people of faith, we go for another type of happiness. And when we reach that transcendent happiness, that is the real meaning of happiness.
What Thomas Aquinas says is that happiness is the perfect possession of the perfect good.
You need to possess the good you love. The good will make you flourish.
And I think if you asked anybody, like, hey, how would you like the perfect possession of the perfect good? I think that's a deal that almost everyone would take.
The ultimate happiness is, of course, in heaven, when we see God face to face.
To see God is a way to possess the maximal good. It will flourish you tremendously. But you can have some happiness already on earth.
Whether or not you're thinking about it or not, that's what you're going after. You want that perfect possession of the perfect good. It's like we're all looking for it. It's like the surfers looking for the perfect wave.
Our culture tends to define happiness by a feeling, right? And it tends to be focused on pleasure, right? Pleasure versus pain, the absence of pain, the presence of pleasure.
I can't help but think of the song Toes by the Zac Brown Band. You know, I got my toes in the water, sitting in the sand, not a worry in the world, a cold beer in my hand. Life is good, you know, I mean, that can be our picture of happiness.
Well, first of all, let's talk about what pleasure and emotion are. Emotion is a kind of a sentiment, but it's a sentiment that you feel in your body. And naturally, emotions, since they have that bodily component, really don't last.
This is shocking for many modern minds. They will put happiness in pleasure or in feeling, and this is not properly happiness. Happiness is more possessing a good than tending into the good.
For example, one of the big things in our society today is sex. People feel a lot of pleasure in sex, right? And they think that that is happiness. These are only superficial kind of happiness. We are made for better happiness, transcendent happiness.
There's something transcendent in us. You know, Aristotle will claim to have some proofs. Plato will claim to have some proofs for the immortality of the soul, for instance. That you're not just matter, that I'm not just matter, that there's something in me that goes beyond just matter, that goes beyond just the material.
Pleasure can be misleading because pleasure is a kind of rewarding feeling that we have, but it may not be fulfilling of us as a person.
Emotions, feelings, all of these are limited goods, necessary for a good life, but they are not the target of human happiness.
Animals live their lives according to pleasure and pain. Humans are different. We can override those immediate impulses and decide what to do.
Human love is made for infinity. Anytime you put this infinite desire for happiness in a limited good, you will find frustrated and you will find unhappiness on them.
Most people are thirsting for something real. And when they're turning to pleasure or turning to emotion, they're looking for something that's going to fill themselves in such a way that they don't need anything else.
And if that's true, then it just seems evident to me that my happiness, your happiness, human happiness is bound up with this part of us. It's bound up with this spiritual part of us.
So I think even when people seek pleasure and seek emotion, they're really trying to seek true happiness. What we try to do is not correct people, but reorient them and say, hey, what you're seeking isn't there, it's over here.
And it's this longing for the eternal. that seems to be wrapped up with our notion of happiness.
Moral law and ethics is not there to limit you, is to make you flourish. The recipe, if you want to see, you have to follow, and then you will find happiness.
I think in our culture, we have this sense of, I want to do what I want to do. But if you're doing what God doesn't want, even if you think you want to do it, ultimately you're not happy.
The moral law is not to put limits to you. It's all the contrary. It's to find the maximal flourishing in your nature. The maximal. In the same way that there are laws in nature how to make a plant to grow well, you know what I mean? If you don't follow these rules, the plant will die.
If you can't teach them happiness, you can show it to them, to the lives of the saints.
And that was St. Augustine's path. St. Augustine sought happiness in different kinds of pleasures and philosophies until eventually he found the one thing that could fill him and not disappear, not be lost. And that was the love of God. And ultimately, that is the source of happiness for every human being.
When Thomas talks about the perfect possession of the perfect good, he says ultimately that good must be God. And so somehow our happiness, this perfect possession of this perfect good, comes in our knowledge of God.
Forget yourself. Stop thinking too much about yourself. This is the source of a lot of unhappiness. We are made to create happiness in others. And in doing this, you find happiness.
And ultimately, love is about self-gift and the giving of ourselves, as Jesus did. And that really is, I think, where we find love, and that's where we find joy.
Service. Think of others. Do good to others. Don't think too much about yourself.
Mother Teresa was happy. And happy people, you can see them. They radiate, illuminate happiness. You can see that in their smiles, right?
It's not about what life can give me, but what God is calling on me to give up of myself, to give myself to the others. I think that's really where we find happiness.
Serve other people. And in doing this, paradoxically, we get happiness.
Confession, sacrament of confession, sacrament of joy, that I find that myself included, even if there's nothing big that needs to be confessed, going to confession for whatever reason, the grace that's received in the sacrament, I think helps us become more happy and joy-filled Christians.
What is happiness? It's the perfect possession of the perfect good. And thus, the perfect possession of the perfect good is the perfect knowledge and the perfect love of God.